Good afternoon, everyone, and I will now call this special planning committee meeting of Tuesday, December 7th. I'll call this meeting to order, and I want to welcome everyone and begin by acknowledging that we are on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, and particularly our near neighbors, the Chiano First Nation and also the Sauk First Nation as well. And in addition, I just want to let people know that there will be a Remembrance Day ceremony, as there always is, on Saturday, with the parade beginning here at the fire hall, and then we'll meet at the cenotaph for a short service, as we always do. So, I'm going to just make a few comments. First, we'll approve the agenda through the committee, and then we'll have public participation as well. So, the general purpose of this meeting is for council, through this committee, to give consideration that the Bufferland Working Group has made to the future of the bufferland per the terms of the mandate that we passed in, I believe it was February. So the one thing I just want to be clear on behalf of the Bufferland Working Group is these are recommendations, and the working group has always been really clear that it is council, your elected officials, who decide what happens with the bufferland in the future. So these are, again, our recommendations, hopefully to inform the decision that council may make, again, through this committee onto council eventually. So, I would like to welcome our staff here, our interim CAO, Suman Tarnowski, but also our planner, Catherine Lysician is here, and Jen Miller is here taking notes as well. So there will be a time for both commentary and questions from staff in terms of what they've read and seen in terms of the recommendations. Okay, so committee, some general questions that you might reflect on, and it would be great to get your input on. Do we love the recommendations that the Bufferland Working Group has made? And if so, what is the advice and direction that we can ask staff to provide to facilitate this discussion further? So that might be one of the things that you ask yourself. Do we have questions or misgivings about the recommendations? Are there other ideas for the future of the bufferland than those proposed by the Bufferland Working Group? And if so, what are these? Now, if there are new ideas, I might ask that we also reflect on whether these have been considered by the Bufferland Working Group already. And that was one of the elements of the mandate of the working group, is to consider a broad range of ideas. And there have been some new ideas that have come through the public engagement that we've had recently, and we've done our best to reflect on these and in some ways also act to see if there's more information that we can gather as well. Okay, so I just want to do a quick summary of the recommendations, and with that, I just want to begin with the vision statement that the Bufferland Working Group came up with. Okay, and
excuse me,
yeah.
Councillor Shukin, did you want to get approval of the agenda?
Not yet. That's okay, thank you though. So, okay, so the bufferland, here's the vision statement that we came up with. The bufferland will remain a green space that conserves the area's ecosystem, protects the water quality in the Bilston Creek watershed, and allows limited human activity. The land is preserved as a protective ecological buffer to minimize the impacts of land use and urban sprawl that will come with the future increase in nearby population. The land will be managed effectively with strategic and operational plans and the appropriate resources, staff and budget, to maintain and inspire environmental stewardship will be in place. Okay, and so pending council support for moving ahead in this direction, including adequately resourcing a management plan, 3 phases are recommended by the working group. The first is to rezone the bufferland to park ASAP. The second is we develop a zoning designation that better reflects ecological conservation and preservation goals. And third, we work toward developing a management plan for this area and one that is effectively resourced. So, as mentioned, the first step is determining council's support in resourcing this area and this vision, if we so choose and want to go with it. So, I will leave you with one final thought, and then we'll go to the mechanics of the agenda approval. So the working group came to understand that if we own the bufferland, we have a responsibility to care for it. And with the likelihood of a very dense neighborhood beside us in time, the same do-nothing approach that we've taken to the site at present is likely to be ineffective and also contains some risks as well. Okay, so those are my comments to open this meeting, except we have an agenda before us. Committee, are there any additions to the agenda? And if not, we have a pink, so we'll just add that as correspondence. Correspondence will be number 4, Ms. Miller, and adjourn number 6 or 5. And with that, can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve.
So Mayor Little and then Councilor Donaldson second, all in favor. Thank you very much. Okay, and with that, we will now go to public participation.
Go ahead.
Gary Smurfett, 3950 Gilbert Drive. I would like to thank council for forming this working group. It's a time to act. And in particular, I'd like to thank Jay and Shelley for their leadership on this working group and for steering us to achieve the guideline goal of 6 months that we were given when we started. I think all members of the working group trust that this committee will ultimately make its own recommendations to council for action. And we trust that they will be done in an expedient fashion, but with full knowledge of what's actually out there. And we hope that every member of council has gone out there, walked the land, saw what's going next door, and taken the time to go through the report. And hopefully, in not just this planning committee meeting, but there will be discussions in other planning committee meetings on this issue before a recommendation for action is brought forward to council for consideration. Thank you very much.
Bonnie Luber, Neil Road. As you know, I have been part of the working group, 1 of 9, but tonight I'm taking that hat off. Tonight I'm speaking as a resident who owns property that adjoins the bufferland, and with absolutely no disrespect to my working group team, who I must say were the best to work with, and we worked diligently and so hard. I would like to say to the Community Planning Committee and to Council what I have been saying all along. I have 3 points to make. First, I agree with the recommendation that we need a park management plan for this area. It is a start. I would rather it be a bufferland management plan. It's unique. This plan should be thoroughly thought out and cover a vision, a rule, a list of resources, maintenance, fiscal plan, usage enforcement, and appropriate zoning, at the very least. Second, I am not in favor of having a 2-stage rezoning process. I would really like council to think hard about this. Here's why. I think it's time-consuming for everyone, including the residents of the chosen. Extra work for staff, possibility of 2 public hearings, stretched out time frame, the financial costs, the land use bylaw changes, etc. I think going to the preferred zoning, doing a thorough job, and doing it right is best. Such words as ecological conservation area or nature sanctuary come to mind. No or little access means little or no maintenance costs. However, there may be a liability cost to consider. During this housing crisis, my thinking is if the province wants to use the bufferland, it doesn't matter what it is zoned, and the timing won't matter either. We have to be careful regarding the value of the property. Depending on the zoning, it could make a difference for many reasons. It is currently zoned CR2 and CR3, and is probably worth a lot more than if it was zoned as park. And since the province's announcement this week about the biodiversity initiatives, the bufferland could possibly be very much valued as a green space. Council probably is privy to more information on this topic than I am. Third, I am strongly opposed to selling the bufferland to the CRD. I don't think this property is conducive to high-density public usage for the entire region, to outdoor toilets, to garbage containers, and the list goes on. In my mind, it is not the best use of this land. I definitely want to see it protected in every way we can to ensure it is preserved in its natural state, kept as a green space bufferland as intended in the 2017 referendum, and kept in Machosen. We have lost too much of our cherished Machosen already. And I think an education component could be a very big advantage. To sum up, having said all of this, the working group could only work with the information they had or could obtain through research. They also had to work around the unknowns. They did the best they could. I am generally pleased with what they were able to accomplish. I think there is still work to do in many ways. This is a very complex and huge initiative. To make completely informed decision, I think it requires more information, more research, and maybe even some legal advice. I also think there could be an advantage in having further input to help with council's decision. Thank you.
Thanks, Bonnie.
Good afternoon, Councillor Schicken and members of council. My name is Morgan Yates, a resident of Gemini Drive. I'd like to reiterate my support for the vision set out by the Bufferland Working Group and my sincere thanks for the dedication of the skilled and committed volunteers who comprise the group. In reviewing the group's recent report, it's really timely to share one key and rather sobering learning obtained 2 years ago from work on the Mary Hill project. And that is the annual costs of monitoring and maintaining a near-urban natural area are significant. In order to make optimum planning decisions, it's really important to have an estimate of these costs and what they could total to over a 20-year time span. In the case of the Mary Hill project, by understanding the net present value of the maintenance and monitoring costs over a multi-year period, the potential value of strategic cost-sharing partnerships could then be assessed. I believe a similar underlying dynamic and trade-off exists for the bufferland. While the land is a tremendous asset, the aggregate monitoring and maintenance cost could end up being a substantial financial burden for the district. But there's good news. It's not necessary to divest of an asset to reduce burden. Various options do exist for strategic partnership and cost sharing. But to negotiate the best such arrangement, the district would need to have 3 key pieces of information in hand. Number 1 would be an informed estimate of the annual costs to monitor and maintain the bufferland. Number 2 would be an appraisal of the current fair market value under the CR2, CR3 current zoning. For example, in a nominal 50-50 partnership arrangement, a party bringing a land asset objectively appraised at, say, $3 million to the table would be well positioned to attract an equal $3 million partnership commitment to offset annual operating, monitoring and maintenance costs. The third piece of information required would be a simple term sheet summarizing the key terms, in particular non-financial considerations, that would be important to the district in any potential negotiation with a strategic partner or partners. Ideally, a next phase of work by the Bufferland Working Group could assemble these 3 key pieces of information. And in turn, this would strongly position the district to optimize planning and long-term outcomes for the bufferland. Thank you.
Thanks, Morgan.
Nicole Schicken, the Lawn Road resident. I just want to say first, I attended several of the working group meetings, and I thought the group was so dedicated. There's several of them here, Gary, Bonnie, Richard, and the chairs were also marvelous, just like an immaculately professional and informed working group. They brought so much expertise to the table, so thank you for that. I am wondering if, I don't really have any specific comments around the 2 recommendations, But I do wonder if, rather than just thinking of like preservation or conservation, council may also consider like regenerative zoning or reforestation practices that would actually enhance the environmental values of the buffer land. I was just walking up Machosen Creek along the trail, and it struck me that, again, if amongst the resource calculations, kind of financial assessments of what it would cost to manage the buffer land, there was included like the cost for the purchase of like 1,000 trees, right? Or we could actually plant up those trails, and that would both function to buffer the riparian area even further, and to kind of act as biofiltration from all the stormwater issues that are going to be coming from Central Mountain residential development. So again, this would just add to the resourcing costs that Mr. Yates mentioned there, but I think it would be really valuable whatever option is pursued. Even if a sale to a third party is considered, there could be terms and conditions put on that sale that required reforestation of areas of the buffer land to sort of green fence it, and also function as like, enhanced riparian area. So that's my thought. Thanks.
Thanks, Nicole. Chris, go ahead.
Okay, some of this I've spoken to before. Oh, sorry, Chris Moore, 4545 William Head Road. A piece of paper came across my desk this morning. Somebody had some of the points that Morgan's pointed out to you just now. And I thought, well, I was going to watch you online and stay home and have a glass of something. But anyway, my notes are sketchy, so please bear with me. But I'm here primarily to, quite frankly, and on behalf of the APRM, to wholeheartedly endorse the points that Morgan has just pointed out to you. In particular, if you want to maybe no, they've all got to happen, but number 2, that is having an independent professional appraisal of the current zoning and status of the buffer lands as they exist now. I'm sure most of you are aware of a recent purchase by the CRD. I think it was featured in yesterday's newspaper. Of all things, a golf course, which to me on a biodiversity scale has got a value of 1/2. Anyway, of all things. And this parcel is about 30% at most of the land size of the buffer lands. Well, it's $8 million they're putting up for this. So I think we need to take a hard, cold look at the zoning as it exists, have it appropriately appraised by professional, and keep that in your hip pocket for negotiations down the road, which are not clear right now. And I'm not suggesting or endorsing that the CRD be a partner. That's a whole different thing, but I'll leave that. So all 3 points have been well made. That's what I particularly wanted to emphasize, but really important, and I don't know how the members of the working group might feel about this, is surely don't let this be the end of that group. There's lots more work to do, and there's a lot of really strategic questions that need to be answered. And I think they've proven themselves to be caring and diligent and have acquired a lot more knowledge in this course of this action than most of us. So I think that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Anyone else for public participation? And with that, going once, twice. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, so committee, over to you folks. The one thing I will stop talking and, oh my goodness. Okay, everyone look that way. Thank you. Okay. So committee, I maybe do want to, hold on one second. Hello, Mr. Jervis, how are you?
I'm doing,
We just finished up public participation, but did you want to say anything?
no, that's fine.
Okay, great to see you.
Thank you.
Okay. So committee, the one thing I realize, there's maybe not the structure to this meeting that I would have wanted, or would normally try to introduce, but remember, this is our first, as a committee, or it's our first round of considerations and discussions, and it doesn't mean it needs to be the last. So I think part of the goal is tonight is to get those initial considerations and then maybe see if we can have some direction to staff for more information. So with that, I would like to open it up to a round table. The one thing I think we should aim to be finished no more than 6. And again, if we can't get everything done, we'll have a chance to do it at a regular planning committee meeting. So, okay, I will open it up as a roundtable discussion. Do you love the recommendations? Are there other ideas? Any misgivings with the recommendations that you have?
Okay, well, I'll go first. I didn't really have a chance to go over all your questions. Actually, I was going to ask Morgan something, but he just left. I was just wondering, going to ask him when he was talking about partnerships, exactly what an example or examples of partnerships actually meant. So anyway, but what I'm going to say that I do congratulate the working group. It was a very dedicated, hard-working group, put in a heck of a lot of time to get all this together. So it's really, really helpful. My one comment was on a management plan, and while I know that the buffer is unique as far as about to be beside a major development, I think it's a mistake as a council to simply sort of put all our marbles in one basket, so to speak, to focus specifically on one area when we have a lot of other parks and trails. And given the population around us, we already know what's happened with Langford, but we're going to have a city-size development at the Royal Bay border. And those people are going to be, and especially if the province carries out with its housing, which is bound to affect those lots in Royal Bay specifically, and possibly in Machosa. I think there's going to be far more pressure on all our parks and trails. We noticed that during COVID. And so I think that if we develop a park management plan, that it has to be for all our parks and not just the buffer, which could certainly have its own little section, but I think a management plan is expensive, and it needs to look at what has been brought up tonight already, which is of course the overall management and maintenance, and added in there, our park acquisition policy, covenants we might use, nature corridors, and all those kind of things I think need to be included in a management plan. I think it has to be district-wide. So for now, that's all I have to say.
Thanks, Sharon. Very little. Councillor Gray? Just while you're thinking about things, the concept of partnerships was explored to some degree by the working group, fully as it possibly could, maybe not. I personally have some questions about the viability of partnerships and how they would work. I mean, we are a local government. Parks, management is part of the realm of a local government. I don't know. I mean, there might be a partnership somewhere with the CRD and another local government. That tends not to happen typically. I have a hard time thinking about a partnership with a land conservancy agency. The way partnerships work, and again, this comes back to some of the discussions that we've had previously. The land conservancy, land trust would maybe buy the land and then turn it over to an agency like the CRD or Chosen. But in terms of working together to manage and monitor, that's, I struggle to see where that would be at play. And the one thing too is we have a unionized workforce, so having on the ground labor, unless it's volunteer, I think that's a big obstacle. So I'm not sure I see the whole partnership thing as viable, but again, it's, I think it's maybe worth exploring, but I personally don't think it's worth getting distracted by and thinking that is the answer until we hear something definitive. So, and sorry, I don't mean to, the point about a management plan for all of our parks, I think is a really great one. And I think you're right, we don't know what the impact is going to be from all the residential growth near us. The one thing we noted with the buffer land though is like it's a near, like it's just right there on the border. So that was the special consideration that we had for that. But I think you're right, Councillor Epp, it's something for us to think more deeply about. So. Go ahead.
Happily. Well, thanks to the Metchosin residents who put so much time and effort into the working group, and much appreciated. I, like some of the public participation, really appreciate the vision statement. Nicely done. When I look at the recommendations, so phase one, looking at that sounds like a very important step. Gauge council support for effective resourcing park management plan. That makes total sense to me, and it seems to me that's the first thing that we need to do. And again, we heard from people speaking about that. So for me, the question is, we're about to go into the budget process, and we know already we're looking at hiring a new CAO. We've got advice last year to have more time in the planning department. We know about needing more time in the engineering department. We need maybe another public works person. Last year we asked for an assistant fire chief. So I see some really significant cost pressures that we're facing. And so that's going to need to be balanced, I guess, against other cost pressures, for example, managing the bufferland park, or as Councillor Epp has suggested, looking at all of our parks. So I'm a bit anxious about that question. So phase one, gauge our support for effective resourcing. If we're going to have it as a park, we need to effectively resource it. And it jumps me down to phase four then. What's the management plan look like in order that we can cost it? Mm-hmm. So how we would do that, I'm not entirely sure. I don't know, Councillor Donaldson, if you have any ideas in terms of the finance front and being on the working group. What would we do to figure out the costs of managing a plan? Any thoughts? Or is it more just talking to the CRD about how they manage their parks? Or
we actually did, each of us had an assignment in that regard, and so the person involved with that came forth with a lot of conversations about it. The purpose of phasing it like this, with having phase one of the zoning of sort of what it is right now, and then securing it so that it actually has a new zone, then gradually going on to a zone a little bit more conducive to not being recreational, so not being like our other parks, but being more ecological conservation kind of corridor for both upper and lower load. We still don't have sufficient information on how that's going to fit with the stormwater management that's going to be on the buffer land with the detention pond. That was the big component that was missing. That in some of the literature could be up to an acre of just building that unit, if it is one sole unit. As we've heard time and time again, both in the bufferland working group and here at public participation in several of our meetings so far, that a whole new zone of its own is another thing that is and was explored in the group, and the group does recognize that there is much more work to do. We also know with our strategic plan that the well, I'm not sure if the bufferland's actually in there, I can't remember now, but certainly updating our master plan for our parks and our trails, and so this could be a component. We also know that there's, bufferland doesn't even exist in the OCP right now, so there's amendments and updates there. So with that in mind, keeping an idea of costs, as far as my own personal perspective on the upcoming budget, that hasn't been explored yet. We did talk about land trusts, the carbon sink, what the return is on that, how many years it takes for that. There's lots of different ideas on that. What's it going to cost? Is there going to be a Friends of the Bufferland? So that would be like a volunteer group. And we have identified that there are other areas in the GDRD, like Riffet's Bog, that does have a volunteer group, and Swan Lake and those sorts of things. And they also have green initiatives that they do, different plantings, and that. And those are all the things that we explored and have heard from our public through the different engagements, letters writing and emails and that sort of stuff. So we're now bringing this forth. But as far as a hard cost and that sort of thing, nothing yet. So taking an inventory of what we have, yes, and an educational component, working with the different post-secondary institutions as far as the preservation, and those would be their costs, but those are the arrangements that we'd have to have. Much more work to be done, certainly.
Can I, just one question to your point, fundamental question, how much? And that might be something to ask staff to begin the work on, is what does a park management plan conducive to the buffer land look like? Now the working group has given some ideas on how that might be framed up in the actual recommendation report. But there's some work I think that we could ask staff to look into, again, really conducive to the buffer land as to what that plan could look like. So, and how much it costs on an annual basis. So, great point.
Great, and that's helpful to hear. I think I saw that we talked to the CRD. I'm just thinking there the people possibly can tell us about running a park close to a big population of what it might take. We're kind of, and I appreciate where the group is looking, saying, well, you maybe need a fence, we maybe want a trail, we may do this, we may do that. So we've got all the options there, but we have to somehow land on some of those options, probably to cost it. So I'm just not sure how that work would be done, but I would say that we need to get some notion of what those costs are, so then we can turn to phase one and let you know, we can support that, we've got the money to do it. So perhaps before we're done, and I'd be happy to move a motion, I'll just have to think about the wording, about getting some staff assistance, and I guess that we would just be getting a rough idea, a rough cost of more or less doing something which doesn't, with respect to what we heard from the podium today, but also in the report, isn't about a big recreational park, but rather a more of a, how shall I call it, there's words here, but a quieter park.
Yeah.
But next to the area. If I think about that then, so that would be the first thing I'd say, let's get after this cost. Let's sort that out however we might do it. Sure.
So one of the things we do know is we do receive funds from a 7% tax share in the industrial park, and since 2017 we've received funds on that. It's gone into general revenue. The working group did discuss that as to creating a reserve, that those funds specifically go to the buffer land. It seems how it's right there, part of the green space corridor, whatever we want to call that, but it is fondly known as the green space buffer land. So that is one of the things that we did explore as well. And as the industrial park does get developed, currently we're looking at about 12,000 annually. I think last year it was getting closer to 14,000, but that will go up as the development gets better established in the industrial park as well. So that is one sourcing that actually is chosen. So.
Yeah, I could respond to that particularly.
Yeah.
I've got a background in healthcare management and that sort of thing. These kinds of ideas crop up from time to time. Taking certain pots of money to pay for certain things and moving it around. I would suggest we take the money to general revenue, decide what we want to spend here, and then move that way. We don't want to be limited by some tax dollar figure that may not allow us to do effective resourcing of the park. So it's just put it in general revenue and then work from there. Otherwise you get trapped and you're not able to manage your park possibly at a certain point. Certainly that goes on when we talk about savings and healthcare a lot. So my first comment was, first we need to get that money question sorted out. So if we talk about it, then I can put together a motion about that question. The second thing that I see then, and I'll turn over to somebody else in a minute, but is the question of, well, do we do this rezoning or not? Jump to it right away. And there seem to be two reasons for that. One was to kind of declare that we're keeping this, not developing it. And the other was the issue of holding off the possibility of the province wanting to put housing in there. So dealing with the second thing first, rezoning it to park to protect it from housing, I don't think is a strategy at all. The province has told us they'll move in and rezone anything they feel like if they want it to be housed. So I would do it for other reasons possibly, but I wouldn't see rezoning it if we end up saying, gee, we don't have the resources. The residents of Metchosin aren't prepared to put this kind of money into managing it. So then that moves us into the prospect of selling it or co-managing it with, what was the words that Morgan Yates shared with us, a cost-sharing partnership, so some other arrangement. So I don't know that we'd make a decision on zoning until we were clear whether or not we were going to hold the land. And I'm saying, well, previously I've argued it should be rezoned to protect it. Well, now the province has moved along. We're in a different place than we were when we first talked about that. And so I'm not sure that that's that important to us in those terms. And then I want to support then what we heard from Bonnie Bouvier today, which is that maybe we want to look at the bigger rezoning at some point, if we're going to hold on to the property. I could go on, but maybe someone else wants to talk for a little bit, and I'll look at that motion about costs.
Mary Lou?
Yeah, thank you. Well, thanks very much to the working group. Very professionally done and timely and very thoughtful. I really do like the vision statement of this as a protected ecological buffer, and that's a good place to start. Where do we go from there? I don't really see value in the two-step rezoning process. I think we should just go to rezoning what we want it to be ultimately, because there are costs associated, not only costs at the province with, well, we've got to get an absolute survey, and then we've got to petition the province, that's cost that, and it's going to also cost staff time as well. I think that we should rezone it what we want it to be eventually. There are grants available right now for reforestation for trees. So there are grants available where all they do is supply trees for reforestation projects, and I think we could look into those. I'd like to ask staff more about the possibility of partnerships. Like, what would that look like? And why would somebody be interested in putting money into something that they don't own? And what kind of organizations, and perhaps examples from other areas in Canada where this has worked. But I think if we keep in mind, if we all buy into the vision statement that this is going to be a protected ecological buffer that we will resource and maintain, protect and enhance, then that should lead us to the next steps. But yeah, I'm open to more information from staff regarding the partnerships. And there is always that option we can sell to the CRD, but we do know that the CRD can resell it at some point. And I don't think they will, if we say we don't want mountain bikes, for instance, whether they would say okay and then change their mind. I don't know how much legal power we would have over the eventual the eventual makeup of that park and what it would be. So I think we should put that on the back burner for now. Yeah, with that in mind, just let's keep talking along the protected ecological buffer
and go from there. But it certainly needs to be well-resourced and well-managed. We can't just do nothing with it. Absolutely.
Sorry, Councillor up next, and then yourself, Councillor Gray, but I have one.
Could I just ask, what ticket leave on the back burner? I just missed that.
Sale to the CRD, I think. Yeah.
Thank you.
And just really quickly, thank you, Mayor Little, for, again, reaffirming the goal that the Bufferland Working Group has put forward with this as a protective ecological buffer area. So it's a park, because that was in some ways the best, catch-all phrase that we could, or zoning, category that we could consider. Although Bonnie Hoover did raise another, the potential of a nature sanctuary. Maybe that's within somebody's, specific zone, but they tend to align themselves with park. But again, thank you for pointing out that that is the goal. It is an ecological protective area, not so much a multi-use park. We did look at that, and the buffer group, from their opinion, felt that that is not something we want Chosen to be involved in. So if we do ask staff to consider what it would be to manage this, that's the vein that we should really focus on. Perhaps we look at different streams of that, but it's not a multi-use park. So in terms of what the bufferland wanted, this committee may ask staff to do something more specific. And the one thing, sorry, and I'll get back to you, Councillor, I think, I was just thinking about this the other day, we maybe have to not be so sure that the CRD would buy this. I think they're the potential, but I don't know if the door is always going to be open. So it's just something that crept into mind. I know that, of course, we all know that there was an interest, but will it be there next year, 2 years from now? Hard to say. So thank you. Councillor, sorry to jump in there.
I just wondered, is it possible to put a protective covenant on the land with the current zoning? And also, if a covenant is on the land, is it written in stone? Like if the property is sold or becomes part of a partnership, I mean, can that covenant, like how easy is it to have a covenant removed, or is that covenant going to protect the land in perpetuity?
Just, I don't know a ton about covenants that are directed toward, ecological preservation. I believe the answer is probably yes. I mean, they're done with private parcels of land. There is the potential for a Section 219 covenant, and we're seeing that having legal force now. And the 219 covenant allows the local government to say what you can or can't do with a parcel of land, and that does go with the title. I understand that you can lift covenants, but it's a challenge. So, is
that something that we could ask staff to look into? I just thought it might be a first step before having to go through the long period of trying to change zoning. But if we could get it immediately protected.
It's an interesting idea. The one thing I would say though is I feel like that almost adds a level of complexity. Because we'd have to define what it is we want in the covenant, go through the legal procedure, placing it on, and then you're kind of stuck with it. The zoning, we can zone, we can rezone. Apparently we can do stuff with bylaws in terms of park or land designations and whatnot. I don't, like off the top of my head, I don't like the idea, but it might be something worth exploring. Could we, even the role of a covenant with this land? Like that might be worth exploring, whether it's now or in the future. What do you think? I'm making a list of things. Okay. Councillor Gray, go ahead.
Yeah, just in response to the mayor's comments and Councillor App, my understanding is the way that things work is that you have multiple agencies put a covenant on a piece of property, and then when you sell it, the person who buys it might be one of those parties to the covenant, but as long as you have other parties, the original purchaser, even if they resell it, are still locked into the covenant. So you have a way of protecting it in perpetuity. And so the fear of sale, well, it's still got the covenants on it. It also, of course, the values change depending on how many covenants and how's it zoned and all that sort of thing. With regards to the idea of sale, I take your point, Councillor Schuch, and the CRD may not have the same interest. There's also, and I'm not overly familiar with it, but Parks Canada is looking at urban corridor parks, so there's maybe they're a party, I don't know. But I think the part for me that's interesting about it, I know there was quite a kerfuffle about the sale of the buffer land, the potential sale of the buffer land to the CRD in the past. And of course the council today, as far as we know, didn't get an independent appraisal. And so we were left with the idea that, holy crow, it's sold it for nothing. $275,000, I think it was the figure that I recall. And surely it's worth more than that. From my perspective, again, experience in a healthcare setting, at the university setting, we know that it's not the buying of the building or selling the building, it's the maintenance and ongoing costs that are important. So selling it for not much money, to me, whatever the price makes sense in the market, and you figure that out by getting an appraisal. So you have your independent appraisal, and then you have your buyer and your seller, and they can look to that independent appraisal and sort out a price. I'd be happy with however those negotiations end up if it's close to the appraisal. And then what we're really doing is we're selling it to get what we call cost avoidance. So the cost avoidance is a tremendous amount of money, and that's what we're trying to avoid. So we don't pick up much money on the sale, no worry. It's really cost avoidance that we're after. And that would be the reason why we would be selling it in accordance with phase one. Do we have the effective resources? Mm-hmm. So I'm not so worried about it. So my second point would be, I think we should promptly move on the recommendation of, I think Chris Moore made a recommendation and Morgan Yates did, and maybe others, that we get an appraisal. Just get it done so we know what zone we're in that vein. And I'd be happy to make a motion in that regard when you're ready.
Thanks, good discussion. I have to say myself, I'm not really seeing the value of getting an appraisal right now. And although clearly if we decided to move toward some type of sale process, that is a critical step. The one thing, again, I will go back to the recommendation, sorry, it's not even so much the recommendations, but the discussion that the Bufferland Working Group had. If there was a contemplation of a sale to a third party of the bufferland, there would be a process around that. Now, some of the negotiations, of course, would have to be, confidential. But the decision to actually sell the bufferland, if we got to that point, probably would have to be open, that we were considering it, and then actually get input from the public in terms of what that could look like and what were some of the conditions that we wanted to put on. So, again, in contrast to the previous process that occurred, we would want to do something that is much more open and clear with the community. So,
yeah, I don't disagree in some essence, but the other part of it is that some of these things are done confidentially in order to manage the price. And if it's just one buyer and one seller, then there may not be a lot of public participation in that question.
Yeah.
The thing I think that is important, though, with regards to that, is that if we go down that path, for me, it's more the assurance to the public that we've done our due diligence. And due diligence is an appraisal, so you know what you're doing. I don't want to be in a position where we're not, where we're staying away from sort of what others might call evidence-based decision making, but I just want to be clear that we do our due diligence. In the past, when I saw the sale documents from before, there was a price which didn't bother me particularly, because of course I'm interested in the cost avoidance going forward. But the other part of the sale agreement, and I don't know if the mayor wants to comment about this, but there were no requirements put on Machosin in terms of the use of the land. So it said you could have bikes, walking, and horses. Now, we could go into this thing in terms of, and I think we heard from Morgan Yates about term sheet. and setting out for ourselves, what is it we want to, and this is the question really that Councillor Epp has just given to us, what is it we want to save there? What are the attributes of the land that we want to keep? And what are we prepared to permit? So the detention pond is there, it's only 1 acre possibly, or maybe it's 2 acres, 117, so it's not really a big part of the land mass, but there's a possibility of a trail, possibility of a fence, and then in the discussion here we saw the working group, it wasn't so much a recommendation, but it's written here, an evaluation of the flora and fauna by terrestrial biologists and ecologists should be sought with a vision of long-term restoration and rehab of the terrestrial habitats. That's a really nice thing to see in the report, and that maybe is worth doing early on in this game as well, to set ourselves up for not just the management plan, but then what do we want to, what are the ecological or the environmental values we want to preserve or support. So that may be an early expenditure as well we'd like to look at to help set us up for whether we own it or somebody else owns it.
Thanks. Good points. I do like the term cost avoidance, and that may be more relevant as we move along here. So I do have one topic I just wanted to get everyone's views on. We've touched it a little bit, but it's the concept of, the second and third phases that we talked about is, the move to immediately rezoning to park, and then doing the work to find the right terms, the right conditions to support an ecological conservation area, protected ecological area. Now, one of the things that the working group noticed with our current park zone, so this is the P3 zone, is it says almost nothing about park. In fact, I think the only thing it talks about is, what is the term? Allowed uses. There's the phrase park. Now, granted, we do have deep within the bowels of the district office, there is a parkland bylaw that covers a little bit more about what's allowed in a park. But in terms of that P3, there's nothing there. In fact, you're allowed a dwelling and you're allowed to subdivide. So that raised concerns with some of the members. However, the parkland designation does offer fairly immediate protection. Of course, a local government can choose to rezone, but you've got to go through the steps. You've got to either go through the alternative approval process. If you fail with that, the bar is pretty low. It's 10% of electors, as I understand it. You've got to go through a referendum. So, however, there is a safety mechanism there in terms of an actual sale. And the other thing that it came to my mind, is the time that it might take to come up with the right advanced designation of park. It might take a year. We might all come to an agreement, but the way that I've seen things roll with this environment is there are priorities that come up that grab your attention. And we just went through the Dogs and Working Group, finally got the bylaw passed on Monday. That process took 3 years from the concept of the working group to the passing of the bylaw. So I think there's concern that if we don't act in a decisive way, we may lose an opportunity, and there may be a new council that comes along with other ideas. So that's part of the thinking around rezoning immediately. Again, notwithstanding some of the other comments that were made, but again, the consensus view amongst the working group was there's good reason to move to the immediate rezoning. So, that's me and the view, and I hope I'm reflecting the working group, but further thoughts on that?
I just want to make a comment about the idea of costs and selling and that sort of thing, and yes, there's more to learn. The one thing that's been very clear since long before the working group is that when the potential sale was advertised in October of 2021, quickly residents got together and started gathering petitions, but let's go back further. Let's go back to 2017. The residents of this community, 76% of them, voted in favor of having a buffer for the residents of this community. There was a great historical land swap. A lot of land was was moved. Some of that land is going to be caught up in some treaty negotiations, but it was really clear from the chosen residents that they wanted to keep this 113 acres, as well as to keep it as a buffer. And I do recall the town hall meeting where it was only going to be 100 meters behind some of those residents, and it was suggested to double that, which it did. Thankfully it did. It's still pretty close, but thankfully it did. There's a little bit of a forest there to protect the neighbors that are closest to the residential development. At the other end, the top end, will be more of a, all of it will be impacted by the industrial park and the residential, with environmental effects with the streams and the ponds and different wetlands that we have discovered in there. But it was really clear from the vote of 2017, 76% of this community said, no, we keep this land. It wasn't about selling it. There were over 500 signatures within 2 weeks gathered just from ad hoc committee getting together that, no, we don't want to sell it. There was surveys of types of uses. So it seems to me, and including the 2 public engagements and the feedback we got, well attended, up to 30 people in both of those engagements, and many letters and emails. The community wants to keep this. So yes, doing a cost analysis, doing a little bit more work on some stuff, absolutely. So I don't get from this community that they want to sell something they voted in favor of keeping to begin with. We already have shrunken our border somewhat, and the encroachment of urban is hitting us hard on all sides, all 3 sides there.
Yeah, thanks. Great point. Mayor Little?
Yeah, I think we should do our due diligence towards getting a price when we're interested in selling it. And for instance, now if we were to ask for an estimate, what do they do? It's zoned right now as CR2, CR3. So do we get a price on CR2, CR3, or as it is park? If it's zoned as park, it will be worth less. So I don't see a lot of benefit to getting an estimate right now. If we were wanting to sell it, absolutely, we should get our own third-party estimate of what it would be worth. I would be in favor of rezoning it to park, which would give time and space for continuing along with the park management plan and for budgetary considerations. And so I think there's value to those, but not to spending our time on an evaluation that may change with zoning. And that we would, if we were interested in selling it at a point later down the road, we'd have to get it appraised again.
Great, thank you. Just one, just to summarize, if we're talking about what direction we might give to staff, and I'm just going to list these off based on the consensus I've heard here. So more about what a park management plan would be, and I would underscore that in terms of the ecological protective zone, and maybe we do, stages of that, or just give us some options of what different phases might be or concepts of that might be. But again, what might a park management plan be in terms of budget, what it could look like. Councillor Rapp was wondering about covenants and the role they might play. And then zoning. That's one I think that we should have a look at as well, and maybe ask staff a deeper question about what the zoning might look like, the timeframes, the costs. And they may provide us with more information that says the 2-stage thing is not worth it, or how the 2-stage thing could work. We've talked about an appraisal. I don't know if there's full consensus about the value of that right now. I think it might come, but we could talk about whether we think that's something to provide with staff. But so those things right now: park management plan, the zoning process, covenants, and possibly the role of an appraisal. But so, Councillor.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add the elephant in the room, which is the provincial government's housing plan. And I think that, we've had only a moment to look at the legislation. You provided us with a clip the other day, and I'd had the clip from the press package. And it's not entirely clear what will happen in Metchosin around housing. And so I think we need to get that clear before we move too far down the path here in terms of, like the question of rezoning and these things. What is our role in the provincial housing strategy? What is Metchosin's role? Because this is the only property of significance that's publicly owned, that is sitting right beside sewer and water hookup. And so if we decide that we're full court press on preserving this piece of property in the face of the province, and we want to do that, I think we need to be clear from the province what's their feeling about that. Or are we planning on preserving this property and then a few months from now saying, and we'll put housing somewhere else? Well, where is that? So I think there's a real balancing needs to be done now, where we need to connect these issues such that we protect this land. But that to me also means then we're not going to be moving mountains to create housing or housing development somewhere in Metchosin elsewhere. And I think it's important that we get some kind of consensus on that before we march down the path on the buffer land. Simply to understand what the province's rules are. Do they apply? Do they not apply to us? And which kind of property do they apply to or not apply to? And I think that question, we're all aware, is an open question at the moment with this particular piece of property, as we've discussed in the last at council the other night. We heard from Johnny Carline's intervention, and he's followed up with an email since then.
Thank you. A deeper question to me is, again, how it's going to apply the new housing legislation and the subsequent regulations to Metchosin. At first glance, as I see it, it doesn't, where it specifies that it needs to be the regulations in certain parts of them, the legislation, certain parts does not apply if you're outside of the urban containment boundary. There's provisions that sewer and water must be in place. So there seems to be some sort of, thing that it's not going to hit us fully, but there are other things that this legislation will impact us by. To me, one of the immediate deeper questions is staff resourcing, because it would be great to get a summary of how the new legislation is going to impact us, and understand how the Metchosin may or may not change from it. So that's a really important thing. But I have to say, going back again to the question of rezoning on an immediate basis, there's a rationale for doing that. Just even as you say, that land is close to sewer and water, and the potential is there. And back to what Councillor Donaldson was saying, we voted in 2017 for the land swap. A big part of that was knowing that if Langford took over the Centre Mountain area, there was some comfort in that there would be a buffer there between the two communities. So to lose that and turn our back on that, and that's pretty challenging in my side. And so I think, again, that's one of the ideas about the immediate move to park, is that we maintain that buffer on a rudimentary basis. So.
I'm right with you. My point is to get ahead of it. And not forget that this is if you will, an externality that we need to be aware of here and move appropriately within the frame. And I'm thinking that zoning isn't going to fix that. It's more a discussion with the province about getting a look at the legislation and discussing with them and sorting out whether this is part of their plan or whether it's not. Okay. And no, I'm talking about how do we protect this from housing, not the other way around. I just want to be clear that if we do end up, if we are able to hold on to it and keep it as a buffer, that would be the best of all worlds. But we know the province is going to a lot of communities and saying that may be what you guys want, but that's not what we're up to. Mm-hmm. So it's not myself putting that forward. I'm rather trying to figure out how do we maneuver in this circumstance. And I just don't want to get caught out by having some other major thing occur to us.
Yeah.
Brought onto us by others, not from our internal discussions. So would you like a motion, Councillor Shukin, about the costing side of it? I could try something on if you like.
I'm okay with doing that, or go ahead, but are there any other ideas that we want to put forward before we start to narrow in on what it is maybe we're going to ask staff to undertake? Arlene?
The whole question about whether the province would mandate us to have housing there. So as I understand it, they're going to allow developers and owners of land to develop up to 6 plexes on single lots. But we're the owners of the land. And so if we decide that's not what we want to do, they can't force us into creating housing, I don't think, especially with the provisions that I think it was 8.4.15 of the latest bill, if it's next to sewer and water or water. I'm unclear about that. Maybe we can get some assistance from staff in terms of what their read of that particular section of Bill 44 is, and whether there is jeopardy that we would be made to provide housing on that land.
I'm as unclear as you are, Mayor, a little. And I think that getting a look at it would be helpful. And I think we've heard from our CAO that they're going to start taking that information up for us, so that's good. It's more that it's different. I think the point that I'm trying to make is that I agree with you. They're saying that the owner of the land will make the choice. Our situation is a little bit different because we are a daughter of that government, and if they want us to develop it, they just tell us. You, as the owner, we're in a little bit more precarious situation than if it were privately owned in that regard.
Yeah.
But they've been clear about that. I'm not trying to make a big problem. I just want to make sure we do link and we do think about it as we walk through our process and do our maximum to protect this piece of property. I'm just concerned looking at the legislation. I think we both concluded the same thing, Councillor Shukin, that it looks like we're going to do well with these particular clauses, but getting it tuned up so we all know and are equally aware of what's going to be a big help.
Okay. The one thing that I'm wondering about breaking away from the buffer land is, I'll ask you and staff as well, do we need to provide, a motion to ask staff to provide like a briefing on the impacts of the potential impacts of the forthcoming legislation? Would that be helpful, or?
I did indicate yesterday's email that there is a report forthcoming that
Okay.
to the next informal meeting because it came from our legal counsel.
Great. Okay, thank you. Okay. I mentioned that there might be a time for input from staff, and Councillor Gray, you wanted to make a motion, but I wonder if there's anything Ms. Lucician and Ms. Tarnowski want to say before we get into maybe some of the direction we might ask you to undertake, or the work we might ask you to undertake.
You want me to come up here, or that's not even plugged in, is it?
Oh, well,
Here, come and sit.
I didn't prepare anything to give to you guys tonight, but I was planning on responding to the motion from the previous meeting regarding, the motion to bring back more information. So this meeting's been really helpful with understanding some of council's questions and concerns. One thing to think about is the strategy around, how you might want to look at all of your parks. And that might be something you want to think about through, maybe not this year, but in future budget years, how you'd like to address all parkland in the chosen. I think that that's really important because it does inform how you kind kind of comment on and allocate dollars towards your park system in the future. And that can be a really effective tool for not only obtaining grants, but to expand the system as the community desires. Yeah, it's just a really good tool for acquisition or disposition or just outlining all of the priorities that the community might identify. So that's a really good tool that some communities have used, and that might add clarity to this discussion if it goes on a little longer. I don't know if I have 1 second. In terms of the rezoning process, just to respond to the timeline, I'll come back with a report that outlines the process for the rezoning. I would be, probably more in favor of going through one rezoning process, just because of the costs associated with crafting that bylaw process, as well as having that public hearing and that sort of thing, because there are costs associated with that. And in terms of partnering, I have seen some tools used. Sometimes it's a covenant, sometimes it's an entire partnering agreement, and I will outline that in my report back to you. There are agencies out there that are willing to partner with municipalities, and there's examples of that in the region. And it just depends on the comfort of the council of the day, and the costs associated with managing that over time can be managed. You'd have to know a relative budget to work with an agency, which I think Mr. Yates alluded to, and that can really help with those discussions as well. So I think that's all I had to add. If there was any specific questions, probably just outline them in this report, and then we'll report back to you.
Yeah, I think that seems like the direction we're headed.
Okay.
Yeah. Guess I don't have to actually bend down. We're going to get this fixed, apparently. Okay. So I think our next step is to maybe clarify what direction that we want to give to staff in terms of more information and reports. And so, Ms. Miller, we're going to ask you to be nimble on those fingers so we can get our resolutions, our motions straight. So, Councillor Gray, you wanted to talk about. I think that the first thing we talked about was the park management plan and cost that, but, well, please.
Yeah, so Catherine's moved away from the microphone, but I guess I want to say this and then we'll see whether or not it makes sense. This is a very difficult task to cost something where you don't have the parameters laid out. But we might request staff review the working group report and estimate costs of maintenance and monitoring the bufferland as a conservation-oriented park through discussions with government entities with experience with parks close to urban settings. That's what I'm thinking we need. The problem is very difficult task.
Is that a motion?
I can make it so. I'm just checking with looking across there through the chair.
Trying to read body language. And, yeah.
I mean, I think partly what it is that we have to be ready for someone to come back that says, well, this is just some ideas and things like that.
Yeah.
I think it's not about getting a strict costing or anything. It's just getting us going on the process.
So you might. I wonder if you can reflect that like an initial review or assessment or.
Yeah. So, I said estimate costs, so I move that we request staff review the working group report and I say estimate costs of maintenance and monitoring of the bufferland as a conservation-oriented park through discussions with government entities with experience with parks close to urban settings. I hope that captures the idea, and I think the point is it's an estimate, and we need to understand we're going to get back a rough,
Yeah.
a rough deal here, which is fine with me. Which is going to, I'm basically order of magnitude.
Okay.
Would be the question.
Councillor Thomas?
Yeah, I just have one thing we haven't really talked about because there's going to be more cost with this, and we did hear some suggestions from Ms. Shukin with green initiatives. So the land swap is right in a watershed. It is the Bilston watershed, the headwaters, Machosen Creek, and with all of the stripping of the land on the Langford side, the potential for flooding, contaminants, etc., coming down through those creeks, which runs all the way through our community, will affect all sorts of different ecosystems, farms, anyone has any kind of licensings, etc., as well as our lagoon, which has a lot of nature activity there as well. So there could be some costs of cleanup or whatever. This is a concern of a lot of different residents and groups that are working on water in those watersheds. What's coming down? Are we going to be that drainage ditch? Can we work closer with Langford on these different things? And should those initiatives be there? But are we going to be faced with some serious environmental costs? So again, it's hard to put a figure on anything, like Councillor Grace is saying. It'll be really a rough estimate, but those are some other costs affiliated with.
Yeah.
And all the more reason to have a buffer as another green filter, as it were, between two municipalities.
Yeah, great point. I actually like Councillor Gray's motion because it does, it references back to the recommendation report. We don't spend a lot of time with the detention pond, but it's there. And so again, in reflection of how the motion is worded, I think we can go back to the report and build in some of those things. And again, key point is ecological protective area or ecological protected park conservation oriented park. I think it fits. I will second that motion for further discussion. Mayor Little, Councillor, any thoughts? I think it's a good way to kick us off in terms of getting that initial sense of things. So, okay. Ms. Lecition?
I just wanted to add to the conversation that I think that a cost estimate for developing a management plan for the park would be relatively easy. It would be, a bit of research with other municipalities or regional districts. Without knowing what would be in the management plan at this stage, I think it would be really difficult for us to know or estimate the costs associated with it. Not knowing if there would be a trail that would need to be maintained, or if there was other amenities or assets within the park that might need maintenance. It gets a little trickier without knowing the level of service that you would identify for that park itself.
It's a great
Over
point.
time.
That's a great point.
Yes, So of course I initially scratched down the cost of maintenance and monitoring plan. We're caught in the horns of a dilemma here. Purchasing a plan or getting an estimate and then going forward, and that will be months away as well. But I take the point, that's my disquiet with the motion, of course, which is that how do you estimate this if there's one trail or two or fences or not and all of that. We can through consensus, remove the last motion and just put a new motion forward, which is a management plan. Cost of a management plan.
The cost of a management plan.
You know, what does it cost to have a plan written up for this
Yeah.
place? That would probably include then the cost
Yeah.
of what we see on page 95 of our agenda package, the evaluation of the flora and fauna,
Yeah.
by ecology. You know, get the whole package together.
Okay.
See what the cost would be. Doesn't move us to the next stage though, which we want to get to, which is
Yeah.
phase one.
Yeah. I have a thought, but Mrs. Tarnowski first of all.
I was just going to suggest that just to get us to somewhat, I don't want to say close, but perhaps reasonable estimate is let's just build in some assumptions to the use of the park. So we can say 1 trail or 2 trails, whatever it is. Let's just build some assumptions so that the consultant's able to give us somewhat of a, I use accurate air quote, operating costs. Because without the estimate, then there's just near impossible for us to get any kind of costing. So we just have to go with some assumptions that council and committee as a whole feel comfortable that to put forth as a starting point for discussion.
Okay, thank you. The one thing that comes to mind for me is, have we fully defined what the ecological protective area means? And the answer is no. Because what it will mean, unfortunately, is there will be a road, and that road will go to the detention pond. But are there going to be trails outside of that? Are there going to be, is there going to be multiple access points? There doesn't necessarily need to be. So one of the ways we might do this is, if this council can come to a consensus that we want this ecological conservation zone, we define what it is and we work toward developing it. And we identify, what budget we have to work toward it. That may only be $14,000, $15,000 a year. So that's another way of possibly approaching it. But again, sorry, I kind of am reacting against the idea of trails because we don't necessarily want trails. And I think what I heard from Ms. Shukin earlier is maybe you look at planting up the trails so access is more challenging, especially for bikes. So what I'm wondering about is maybe we go back and do a 2-pager on what an ecological conservation area might look like, and then build a management plan on that. Does that? I feel like I'm maybe upending things, but again, the point from staff is a really good one. What are we resourcing? Trails, fences, whatever. We're not hard to say. So thank you, Councillor. Go ahead.
Well, it seems to me our biggest fear is the impact from Langford and the housing development. So one thing that we need is, as far as management, would be someone that is regularly in the park monitoring the usage from outside the border, which could include people moving in, the unhoused moving in and setting up camps in the park. It can just mean people coming in from elsewhere and using it for, build fires or whatever and so, a lot of our issues are all surrounding trying to keep it safe from that side of things. So just in the maintenance or management would definitely needs some type of, I want to call it security, but something like that.
Yeah. Thanks. I would move that Councillor Shukin, myself, goes back to the Bufferland Working Group to define what a protective ecological area could mean, to provide some parameters around that. And that then is the basis of developing a resource plan, or one of the bases for developing a resource plan. So I would make that motion. Oh, I'm sorry.
Motion on the table, but by consensus, we can remove that earlier motion.
Well,
With the group. It's owned by everybody.
Okay. Hearing no objections, that motion is removed. Okay, thank you. The motion I would make is that Councillor Schicken further connect with the Bufferland Working Group and other parties to help define what a protected ecological buffer could look like in terms of one that's designated as park, and that be further used as the basis of developing a resource management plan, and as well as the budget for it.
I'll
Thank you.
second that.
Great, thank you. Seconder and discussion. And the only point I would say is it seems like that addresses the question of what is it we're going to resource. And we can identify, and that's where we can even do phases. So we have one trail, no trails, and do a costing with that. So at least gets us towards something, so.
So, and then it looks like possibly your framework is already there under phase 4. In other words, the concepts that we need to say, well, yes or no, or and just, or options.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the way of doing it. So managing access, including use of fencing, an option. And we heard the buffer land working group talk about fencing a certain way. And then we've heard from Nicole Schuken today, well, maybe managing access with, or maybe you're adding to it, but that with reforestation. Yeah, you've got a good list there to start with, at least to see if we get down the path a little bit.
Great. The one thing I will add to this, personally, if you have a park that is, and the intent purpose of it is to share that wild space with your residents, to me it's quite unethical to think about trying to keep people out, especially those who might live in another municipality. However, if you have set up a piece of land with a conservation goal and you're working toward that, there's a clear reason why you might limit access. And so that again is part of the thinking about where we're at with this. So like what the recommendations are working toward. So that's, yeah, I put that out there. Okay, there's a motion on the table. Any further thoughts? Councilor Craig?
Yeah, I like your last comment there. That was a discussion that we did have, as you recall. One of the mechanisms in doing that is to be able to educate the public. Doesn't matter which community you live in, whether it's Langford or Machosen or visitors beyond, because they will find places like green spaces to go, and educating them what ecological reserves are, what actions are actually happening in there. There happens to be a group of railroads, university students who are coming in and doing some studies and that sort of thing, so this is ongoing, and letting that be known across the region that this is a sensitive area. I think the more knowledge people have, the more responsibility they'll take consideration to be mindful of those sorts of things. Not to be naive, I don't think, but I think people understand.
Yeah.
You know, I know when I was out walking waiting for an appointment over Chatterton Way and Redlet's Bog, and just reading their information on a post was phenomenal things that they've been doing over the years. So, and taking some ownership. You know, it was suggested in the group as well to have some stewards maybe even.
Mm-hmm.
But when you do bring in on partnerships from post-secondary, I think that is an asset.
Thank you. And you know, just building on that point, I've been not avoiding this, but forgetting to mention this all evening, the potential of research being conducted on the buffer land. So whether it's on forest ecology, the movement of large mammals in the area, again, building on this whole concept of a wildlife corridor that's been talked about, I think there's a lot of potential there. And Anna Hall at the October 4th meeting had mentioned this and really opened my eyes to the potential of that. Interestingly, Councillor Donaldson and I got an email last night from a young person at, I think she's a post-secondary grad student at Royal Roads who's interested in doing a project on the buffer land. And her parents live in Machosen and they were at the working group, one of the working group meetings. So the research interest is out there, and we probably will have to figure out how, if we want this to happen, and I don't know why we wouldn't, what a research protocol might look like in chosen on the buffer lands and whatnot, so, yeah. Any further comments before we call the question on this?
Yeah, just following up, I mentioned fencing, but in the sense of as it's written in the report. I'm not, I'm just that it was there, and so I've been using it as an example. What I saw here was to manage access. You know, the idea that I got with attending the working group meetings that I did attend was you don't want to have mountains of people just charging into the area, but if they can be directed to a path, that's why I was seeing that as compared to the idea that nobody would ever go in there.
Yeah.
And I can see from the report, and no criticism here, but all of this, we're hedging on all these questions. So if you can move those along a little bit further down the path, then we can discuss them, then that can get us to the costing a little bit easier. Still, there'll be estimates, of course, but I think that would be helpful. I wanted to move as quickly as I could to help on phase one there, but I think you've got a better plan here. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Hearing no more questions, I will call the question on the motion. All in favor? And none opposed. Thank you very much. Councilor.
I also wanted to make a motion that we ask staff to give us some examples of park management plans in other communities, the approximate cost and what possibly, if possible, what those communities spend as far as maintenance and upkeep on their parks within that park management plan.
I was wondering if, so Ms. Vasician is going to do a report for us, and what we could do is we could make a motion to include that and other things in the report, which probably will happen.
General idea.
Yeah. Do we, I guess we need a motion to do that, or could we just ask you to include them, Catherine? Or Ms. Vasician?
Could we just have a motion so it's clear?
Okay, sure, yeah. Okay, so if I could, I'll make a motion that we request a report on the Bufferland Working Group's recommendations from staff on a range of topics. And now I've got the zoning process.
Well, I just made a motion, so.
Oh, okay.
Well, it's not seconded though.
Could we withdraw?
It wasn't seconded, so
Okay.
it's not on the table yet.
Okay. Are you okay with that?
It's fine, whatever.
Okay, but we'll include it in this motion, so. Yeah, well, we'll capture it in this, the report that we're gonna ask. Okay, so that we direct staff to provide a report on the Bufferland Working Group's recommendations, and the report to include information on the zoning process. Sorry, Councillor Epp, your thing was other examples of park management plans and annual budgets, or?
Well, I guess you call it annual budgets.
Okay.
Cost, relative cost.
Okay, and I will mention that in the working group's report, there is a list of, there's a list of park zoning, so it's not the same thing you're asking for. Okay, so the third thing would be the role of covenants, possibly. And then, and also the impact from the province's housing strategy and the, what Bill 44 seems to say. Sorry.
Just for clarity, the housing would be separate from this part.
Okay, gotcha. Is there anything else?
Partnerships. Yes, partnerships and zoning.
Okay, we got zoning, I think. Yeah, and the potential of partnerships in terms of the buffer land. And are there specific examples out there? Anything else before I say so moved? So.
You need a second?
Yeah, so moved. Okay. Mrs. Miller, do you got the motion? Okay, thanks. Any further discussion? Okay. I will call the question. All in favor? Great, thank you very much. Now, the one thing I will be cognizant of is there's a lot on staff's plate right now, so we're not necessarily going to get this right away. And I think it would be a good idea if once you get moving if you and Mr. Sishin, if you and I can check in with each other just to make sure we're kind of focused on the plan as it reads. So, yeah. And not even as it reads, but just I can help you capture the spirit of the discussions and some of the stuff that we've been through before. So, yeah. Okay. Okay. And you know what? I think we've had a full discussion on this at this point. So, are there any more topics that folks want to get into, and other than before we move toward adjournment? Thank you very much, everyone, for your patience. Good discussion. Again, I recognize that this is pretty open-ended, so I think we'll begin to firm things up a little bit more. So, can I have a motion to adjourn? Councillor Donaldson and Councillor Gray, thank you very much. All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you so much. Thank you, audience.
Thank you.